Out of the haze of scrapyard smoke, a German shepherd staggered into view. His ribs cut sharp lines beneath a ragged, dirt-caked coat, each step showing how little strength remained. His eyes were hollow, drained by hunger and fear, and his whole body looked less like a dog and more like a shadow drifting out of the dust. By all rights, he should have vanished like so many other abandoned strays, lost without notice. But on that sweltering afternoon, when the air itself shimmered with heat, 3 men stood waiting. They carried steel pipes in their hands and cruel laughter in their throats, watching the broken shepherd with a predator's amusement. Across the road, behind a sagging fence, a woman's lips moved in desperate prayer. She prayed for someone to step in, for someone to stop what was about to unfold. No one noticed the Marine step forward. No one thought a starving dog's life was worth protecting. But the shepherd would remember the sound of those boots striking the dirt, steady and unflinching. He would remember what it felt like to be chosen, and how everything changed in that moment. What came next would make you cry, and it would make you believe that even in the darkest corners of the world, hope can still walk on 4 legs. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that no person and no animal should ever be abandoned, tap that subscribe button. Because this story, this one, might just restore your faith in miracles. The late afternoon sun bore down on Redwood Springs, punishing and relentless. It pressed through the thin veil of clouds and baked the ground until the very air seemed to ripple. Redwood Springs was a small Colorado town crouched against the edge of the mountains. Pine ridges stood around it like watchful sentinels, tall and solemn, and the old rail lines that once rattled with freight now sat quiet, their clatter faded into silence. Years ago, the town had thrived. Sawmills, scrapyards, and machine shops kept families fed and streets bustling. But time had moved on, and so had the work. Many of those businesses now lay behind chain-link fences, their roofs sagging, their yards filled with rust and weeds. The smell of hot iron still lingered, but it was the smell of decay, not progress. It was in one of those forgotten places, Redwood Scrapyard, that a figure staggered in from the roadside. His ribs stuck out like the frame of a broken umbrella, thin skin stretched tight over bone. At first glance, he looked less like a German shepherd and more like the ghost of one. The town did not yet know his name. But his body carried the story of his suffering plainly. His coat, once rich with the black and brown sable sheen that shepherds are known for, was now patchy and matted, streaked with grease and oil. His amber eyes burned with hunger and exhaustion, and his gait was stiff, uneven, the walk of an animal too weak to run but too desperate to stop moving. He was not a puppy, no longer young, 5 years old, perhaps, yet still in what should have been his prime. With care, he might have been strong, proud, the kind of dog meant to work alongside men. Instead, his frame was a testament to weeks without proper food. What had drawn him in was simple, the faint scent of bread. A scrap discarded, forgotten, tossed aside by men who never considered that an animal's life might depend on it. To the shepherd, even a crust was treasure. His paws pressed into the dirt as he slipped past leaning towers of rusted sheet metal. The heat shimmered on their surfaces, turning them into warped mirrors. From a corner of the yard drifted the sour reek of rotting garbage, seeping from barrels that leaked black fluid into the ground. His nose twitched, his tongue dry, ears flicking at every faint sound. This place held no safety, but hunger had driven him farther than fear ever could. At the far side of the yard, 3 men leaned against a heap of twisted rebar, their voices carrying lazily through the heat. The first was Ray Dobson, broad-shouldered, in his 40s, with a belly hardened by beer and factory meals. His head was shaved close, and a snake tattoo wound down the back of his neck. He was the sort of man who laughed loud and hit harder, especially when he knew no one could, or would, stop him. Beside him stood Kyle Mercer, younger, late 20s, wiry, restless. He chewed gum constantly, his jaw always moving as though it could drown out the silence of his conscience. His eyes darted back and forth, never resting in one place. The third was Frankie Bowl, pale, mid-30s, his narrow face pinched like a fox's muzzle. His eyes gleamed with the meanness of someone who had always chosen to crush the weak. As a boy, he'd been known for ripping the wings off flies. As a man, he looked for bigger things to break. When the yard had work, the three men showed up. When it didn't, they lingered, drinking, spitting, laughing, making sport of whatever misfortune came near. Ray lifted his chin toward the shepherd. "Well, look what wandered in. Dog thinks he's invited." Kyle chuckled, his voice sharp. "Look at him. Barely standing. Probably hasn't had a real meal since winter." Frankie smirked, lifting a length of rusted pipe and spinning it in his hand. "That's the fun part. Watch him crawl for scraps." The shepherd froze. His amber eyes locked on the crust of bread lying near their boots. His body trembled, ribs rising and falling beneath his torn coat. He waited, tense, every instinct pulling him forward but every ounce of fear holding him back. Across the road, Evelyn Carter watched. She gripped a rag in her hand so tightly her knuckles blanched. At 62, Evelyn was tall and lean, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her eyes, sharp and gray-blue, had once belonged to a woman who managed a household, raised 2 sons, and held her husband's hand through his final illness. Now she ran Carter's Auto, the repair shop her late husband had left her, carrying herself with a dignity forged in years of hardship. She had seen men like Dobson, Mercer, and Bull all her life. Loud when unchecked, but cowards when called to answer. Yet 3 men against 1 half-dead dog, that was cruelty she could not ignore. "Leave him alone," she muttered under her breath, though her voice could not carry across the fence. Her hand shook as she thought of calling the sheriff. But she knew better. Travis Monroe, owner of the Scrapyard, had friends on the town council. Complaints vanished in Redwood Springs. Inside the yard, Frankie slapped the pipe against his palm, testing the weight. "Look at him shake," he sneered. "He knows what's coming." The shepherd crept forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of bread. His stomach twisted with hunger, but his eyes never left the crust. "Go on, mutt," Kyle taunted, nudging the bread closer with his boot. "Take it if you want it." The dog tensed, ready to lunge. But before he could, Frankie slammed the pipe against the concrete. The crack rang through the yard, echoing against the rusted walls. Startled, the shepherd staggered sideways, claws scraping across cement, ears flat against his skull. The bread skittered farther away, out of reach. From across the fence, Evelyn cried out, voice high and sharp, "Stop it. Stop this right now." But her words were drowned in laughter, hard, cruel, unrelenting. Ray leaned forward, a twisted grin spreading. "What's the matter, Carter? You care about mongrels now?" Evelyn's grip on the rag tightened until it nearly tore. She took a step forward, but the gate was padlocked. Her voice could never rise above the jeers of 3 men who had nothing better to do than torment the helpless. Inside, the shepherd steadied himself, body curling inward as though trying to shield what little strength remained. His breath came ragged, shallow gasps. Yet still his eyes clung to the bread, the one promise of survival left to him. Frankie's grin widened. He raised the pipe again. "Let's see how long he lasts." The sun burned down, heat pressing like a weight against the yard. Evelyn's desperate cry rang out once more, but it was smothered by the men's laughter. The pipe swung down. The laughter of 3 men echoed against the walls of Redwood Scrapyard, drowning her voice completely. The pipe crashed against the ground, sparks jumping as it struck concrete. The German shepherd recoiled, ribs heaving, paws skittering as he tried to back away. The men laughed harder, their voices bouncing off the hollowed walls of the yard. Ray spat into the dirt, smirking. "Not much of a fighter, is he? Look at him crawl." Frankie's grin widened, teeth flashing. He swung the pipe lazily, each arc slicing the air. "Don't need him to fight. Just need him to beg." Kyle chewed gum with loud, exaggerated snaps. His eyes darted between the shepherd and the fence where Evelyn Carter stood. Careful, Frankie. She's watching. Let her watch, Frankie sneered, voice dripping with cruelty. Ain't a thing she can do. Sheriff won't lift a finger. Monroe's got him in his pocket. Evelyn's hands shook against the chain link. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "You stop this. That dog's done nothing to you." But her words landed hollow. The men turned their backs to her, amused by her fury, safe in the knowledge that her threats carried no weight in a town where Travis Monroe's reach ran deep. The shepherd, trembling, lowered his head toward the crust of bread. His stomach clenched, saliva pooling at the corner of his mouth, hunger dragging him forward despite the terror crawling over his skin. Frankie lifted the pipe again, letting it rest across his shoulders like a baseball bat. His pale eyes gleamed. "Go on, mutt. Take a bite. Let's see how fast you run when I swing." The shepherd inched closer, paws dragging through the dust. His body sagged under its own weight, but his eyes locked on that crust, the only hope in reach. Then, the rhythm of the moment broke. Boots struck gravel outside the yard, measured, heavy, carrying a weight not just of body but of presence. The kind of step that turned heads before the man himself came into sight. The laughter faltered. Evelyn's gaze snapped to the road, and her breath caught. Relief washed across her sharp features, though she didn't yet dare to smile. From the haze of heat, shimmer and sunlight, a figure came forward. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His frame carried the quiet strength of someone who had endured too much to waste movements now. A worn green field jacket hung over a plain gray shirt, jeans faded from years of use, boots scuffed but solid. His face was weathered, creased at the brow, shadowed by stubble. His hair was trimmed close, military short, but it was his eyes that gave him away. Steel gray, steady, unflinching. Eyes that had stared down chaos before and didn't flinch at cruelty. Ethan Cole. Former Marine. Returned to Redwood Springs only months ago, after years in service that had taken him across oceans and into deserts where silence often meant danger. He had come home carrying scars invisible to most, scars that whispered in the night when the world was quiet. He had meant to live quietly, to keep his distance. But some things a man could not walk past. And this was one of them. The men shifted uneasily as Ethan stepped up to the gate. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence carried weight. He unlatched the padlock with a practiced flick. Monroe's men were careless, always assuming no one would dare intrude. The chain rattled as the gate creaked open. Ethan walked inside. His boots struck the concrete slow, deliberate. The shepherd's ears pricked, eyes snapping toward the sound. For a moment, he froze, uncertain whether this new figure brought harm or help. His body trembled, torn between instinct to run and hunger to survive. Ethan stopped several paces short of the dog, crouching low. His hands stayed open, palms bare. His voice came low, steady, carrying no threat. "Easy, boy." The shepherd's breathing hitched. He lowered his head, but his amber eyes locked on Ethan, wary yet searching. The Marine didn't move closer. He simply waited, letting silence bridge the gap. Behind him, Frankie scoffed, pipe still balanced across his shoulders. "What's this? Soldier boy thinks he's some kind of hero?" Ray chuckled, though it came out forced. "Ain't your business, Cole." Dog wandered in. "Scrap's ours now." Ethan's gaze flicked toward them, sharp as a drawn blade. He didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. The silence itself pressed heavy. Kyle shifted uneasily, gum snapping louder between his teeth. He muttered, "Come on, Ray, maybe we." But Frankie cut him off, stepping forward. His grin stretched meaner. "What, you think you're talking him? Monroe don't give away nothin' free." Ethan rose slowly to his full height. His shadow fell long across the ground, shoulders squared, jaw set. His voice came quiet, but it carried iron. "He's not yours." The laughter cracked. Frankie's grip tightened on the pipe, his arrogance flickering. "And what if I say he is?" Ethan's eyes didn't waver. His tone stayed low, steady as a storm rolling in from the mountains. "Then you'll have to swing that pipe before I walk out of here. And you'll find out what happens when you do." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The shepherd, forgotten for a moment, crept forward an inch. His nose twitched, catching Ethan's scent, a mix of sweat, leather, dust. Something steady. Something not cruel. Evelyn gripped the fence with both hands, whispering under her breath, "Lord, let him take that dog. Please." Ray's smirk faltered. Kyle looked away, chewing hard. Frankie sneered, but the pipe stayed lowered, swinging idle in his grip. Ethan crouched again, ignoring the men, focusing only on the shepherd. His voice softened. "You've been through hell, haven't you, boy? But you're still standing. Come on. Let's get you out of here." The shepherd trembled, caught between hunger and fear. His paws edged forward, slow, dragging. He stopped just short of Ethan's hand, amber eyes searching. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope flickered in them. Fragile, but real. Ethan stayed perfectly still. He let the dog decide. Seconds passed, stretched into what felt like minutes. Then, with a faint whine, the shepherd pushed his muzzle into Ethan's open palm. Ethan's fingers curled gently, steady on the thin fur. He didn't pull, didn't rush. Just a quiet, grounding touch. Behind him, Frankie spat into the dirt, muttering curses under his breath. But none of the men stepped forward. Ethan rose, sliding one arm carefully beneath the shepherd's body. The weight startled him, too light, too fragile, bones pressing sharp against his forearm. He lifted him as though lifting something sacred. The shepherd sagged against his chest, too weak to struggle, too tired to fear. His head rested against Ethan's shoulder, eyes slipping closed. Ethan turned toward the gate. His boots struck each step like a drumbeat, carrying both defiance and promise. No one moved to stop him. Not Ray, not Kyle, not even Frankie. As he crossed the threshold, Evelyn's breath came out in a sharp sob of relief. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, Lord." The Marine didn't answer. He only kept walking, steady as stone, the shepherd cradled against him. Behind him, the laughter was gone. In its place was silence, brittle and uncertain. And for the first time in a long while, the yard felt powerless. The old pickup rumbled down Main Street like a tired beast, its frame rattling and groaning with each bump in the cracked asphalt. The engine coughed in protest, but the Marine behind the wheel drove it steady, as though every jolt were just another test of patience. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the ridge, painting the storefronts in long streaks of amber and gold. Redwood Springs looked almost peaceful in the glow, though its silence felt heavy, like a town carrying more stories than it cared to tell. Ethan Cole kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other resting near the bundle in his lap. The German shepherd lay curled in a worn towel Evelyn had rushed to fetch from her garage, the faded fabric carrying faint traces of oil and cedar soap. The dog trembled against him, each shallow breath rattling through his ribcage. Every bump sent a faint wince through the shepherd's thin frame. But he didn't cry out. He hadn't made a sound since Ethan lifted him from the yard. Ethan's jaw tightened as he stared at the road ahead, but his mind wasn't in Redwood Springs. It was far away, half a world away, on a battlefield where smoke and sand had filled his lungs. He saw a ranger. A German shepherd, strong and disciplined, his partner in uniform. They had walked side by side through the dust of Afghanistan, through alleys where danger waited behind every door. Ranger's bark had steadied Ethan when bullets cracked too close. His eyes had spoken of loyalty no man could question. Then came the blast. Fire. Screams. Shrapnel tearing through silence. Ranger's body crumpled, limp in Ethan's arms. His last breath had echoed in Ethan's chest louder than the explosion. Ethan had carried him until his legs shook, until the dust swallowed them both. And after that day, he had sworn he would never put himself in that place again. Never to watch another shepherd's life slip away in his arms. But here he was. Another German shepherd. Same amber eyes. Same battered body fighting to live. Ethan's chest ached with a weight he thought buried, the kind of weight that no battlefield metal could ever lighten. The truck turned onto a side road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The Redwood Veterinary Clinic stood ahead, a squat brick building, its faded green sign swaying lightly in the breeze. A row of cars sat parked out front, their windshields glowing orange with the last of the sun. Ethan pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment. His hand stayed on the shepherd, steady, unwilling to let go. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, but his expression gave nothing away. Finally, he opened the door. The moment he lifted the shepherd, the lightness of the dog's body struck him again. Bones pressed sharp against his forearms, as though he were carrying little more than skin and memory. He held him close, tightening his grip, as if sheer will could keep the breath inside the dog's chest. Inside, the air changed. The warm smell of pine and dust gave way to antiseptic sharpness, alcohol, bleach, faint traces of animals who had passed through in better health. A young woman stood at the counter, her hair pulled into a messy bun, freckles scattered across her nose. She wore a green polo embroidered with the clinic's logo. A name tag read, Maya Lee. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ethan carrying the shepherd. She hurried out from behind the counter, voice urgent but gentle. "Bring him back, sir. Exam room's open. Dr. Ward's here tonight." Ethan nodded once. He didn't waste words. He followed her down a narrow hallway, the shepherd trembling against him. The exam room smelled of disinfectant and faint lavender from a plug-in diffuser in the corner. Metal instruments gleamed under bright fluorescent light, their edges sharp and clinical. Dr. Helen Ward entered within minutes. In her early 50s, Helen carried herself with the grounded authority of someone who had seen more than her share of heartbreak and refused to let it make her bitter. Her iron-gray hair was tied into a long braid that brushed against her lab coat, and her brown eyes were sharp, steady, but never unkind. People trusted her because she didn't sugarcoat. She told the truth plain, even when it hurt. Years ago, she had lost her stable of horses in a barn fire, and from that night onward, she never promised miracles. But she never stopped fighting for them either. She approached the table with brisk movements, her hands sure. Ethan laid the shepherd down, and Helen's gaze swept quickly over the animal. Male. About 5, maybe 6 years old, she murmured, pressing her fingers gently along the dog's side. Her voice carried both assessment and pity. "He's in terrible shape." Her thumb pulled back his lip, pressing against pale gums. "Severely dehydrated. Malnourished. Multiple contusions along the ribs." She traced a finger gently down his side. The shepherd flinched faintly, but no sound left his throat. "Lucky nothing's broken," she continued, though her tone suggested luck had little to do with it, just neglect. Ethan stood still, shoulders squared, his silence heavy. Ranger's memory pressed close, whispering in his ears. He forced his fists to stay unclenched, forcing the past back into the shadows. Helen looked up at him. "Where'd you find him?" "Scrapyard," Ethan replied, voice flat, clipped. Helen's jaw tightened. "Figures. If county control gets hold of him, he won't stand a chance. Dogs this weak, this scared, first time he snaps, they'll brand him dangerous. And that'll be the end." On the table, the shepherd stirred weakly, his amber eyes flicking open. For a moment, they met Ethan's. The Marine leaned closer, his voice dropping low, almost private. "Hold on, boy. You're not going back there. The door creaked open. Evelyn Carter entered quietly, a folded blanket clutched in her hands. It was old but soft, pulled from a trunk in her garage where she kept things too useful to throw away. She laid it gently on the counter, her voice softer than usual. This will make him more comfortable. I also brought some clean water. Helen nodded curtly. Good. We'll need it. Maya moved quickly, preparing in 4. Within moments, a bag of fluids hung from the metal stand, a thin line slipping into the shepherd's foreleg. The dog flinched but didn't resist, his amber eyes drifting shut as exhaustion won. Ethan's throat constricted. The sight pulled him back to another sterile room years ago, where Ranger had lain too still on a table, shrapnel buried too deep. The smell of disinfectant had burned in his nose, just like now. He had promised himself he'd never stand in that place again. Yet here he was, hand pressed against another shepherd's side, waiting to see if breath would hold. Helen broke the silence. If someone steps up, keeps him out of the county system, he might make it. But it won't be easy. He'll need a high-calorie diet, small frequent meals, hydration, and patience. A safe place. Someone willing to put in the time. Ethan said nothing, but Evelyn stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her voice was low, but insistent. Ethan, if you walk away now, he has no one. You know what that means. He looked down at the shepherd. Skin stretched over ribs, breath shallow, but still alive. He thought of the scrapyard men, their laughter, the crack of the pipe. He thought of Ranger, the one who had given his life without hesitation. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan reached for the clipboard Helen had placed on the counter. His eyes scanned the intake form. He picked up the pen. He stays with me, he said. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. The scratch of pen against paper filled the room, a small sound, but one that felt final. Helen gave the faintest nod, approval hidden in her eyes. Evelyn exhaled softly, relief easing her sharp features. On the table, the shepherd's eyes flickered open again. This time, when they lifted, they weren't searching for bread or fearing the pipe. They found Ethan. And for a heartbeat, there was something new. Not just survival. Hope. When the night deepened and the town grew quiet, Ethan carried the shepherd home. His property lay at the edge of Redwood Springs, a modest house, 1 story tall, its paint weathered, its porch leaning just a little. Beside it stood a garage, neat and orderly, each tool hung carefully on pegboards, each bin labeled. The precision of a man who had lived too long by military order. Inside that garage, Ethan laid Evelyn's blanket carefully in a corner, beside a dish of water. He set the shepherd down gently, watching as the dog curled onto the blanket, his ribs still showing but his breathing steadier than before. For the first time in years, the shepherd closed his eyes on safe ground. But safety was fragile. And Ethan knew that shadows from the scrapyard would not vanish so easily. The fight was only beginning. Morning light stretched pale and thin across Redwood Springs, filtering through the pines like golden dust. Dew clung to the grass in Ethan's yard, each drop glimmering faintly in the early sun. Inside the garage, Shadow, though Ethan hadn't spoken the name yet, it hovered unspoken in his mind, lay curled on Evelyn's blanket, ribs rising and falling with slow, shallow breaths. The shepherd had survived the night. That alone felt like victory. When Ethan stepped into the garage, steaming mug of black coffee in hand, the dog's ears twitched faintly. His amber eyes opened halfway, wary but not wild. It was progress, measured in inches. Evelyn's sedan rolled into the drive not long after. She stepped out carrying a wicker basket, the kind she once used for groceries. Inside were rags, tins of meat from her shop, and a jar of broth she had simmered herself. "How's he doing?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the shepherd. "Still breathing," Ethan said simply. She nodded, her sharp gaze softening for just a moment. Then her tone hardened, as though remembering something urgent. "You should know who runs that scrapyard. Travis Monroe. His family's had their claws in this town for decades, scrap metal, salvage, half of it off the books. He's been in trouble before, dumping, brawling, tax evasion, but every time, he slips free. His brother sits on the council. And the sheriff? More often than not, his hands are tied." Ethan's jaw flexed, the coffee mug steady in his grip. He'd seen this pattern before, in places far from Colorado. Men who thought themselves untouchable, hiding behind power, using fear as their weapon. "So he believes he owns this town," Ethan said. Evelyn gave a tight nod. "And the men you faced down at the yard? They're his shadows. They run errands, break things, scare off anyone who dares complain. If Monroe thinks you took something of his, he won't let it go quiet." Ethan's eyes slid to the shepherd, curled fragile but alive. The dog lifted his head faintly, amber gaze catching his. "He's not Monroe's," Ethan said flatly. "Not anymore." That night, silence lay heavy across Ethan's property. The sky was ink-dark, stars scattered like pale glass above the ridge. Ethan sat on the porch, boots braced against the wood, watching shadows ripple through the trees. Inside the garage, Shadow shifted restlessly, his breathing uneven. Every clang of metal from the rafters made him twitch, every faint creak sending tremors down his body. Trauma lingered deep. Then came a sound that snapped Ethan from thought, the faint crunch of tires over gravel, distant but deliberate. He straightened, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the darkened road. Headlights did not appear, but the sound lingered, too slow, too careful. Then, silence. When dawn came, something waited for him. On the porch steps lay a plain brown envelope, edges damp with dew. Ethan bent slowly, every sense alert. Inside, he found a single photograph. The image showed Shadow curled on the blanket inside the garage, eyes half-lidded. The angle was distant, taken through the fence. Someone had been watching. His grip tightened on the photo, but his face stayed unreadable. He scanned the tree line, the fence line, every shadow stretching long in the morning sun. Behind him, Shadow stirred, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His instincts knew what Ethan's eyes had already confirmed. They weren't safe. The day carried on in muted quiet, but Ethan's mind stayed sharp, each sound dissected, each shadow watched. Instead of fear, he turned his attention to Shadow. Healing would come not just from food and water, but from trust. Ethan remembered his training, how K-9 bonds were forged not through commands barked but through patience, routine, and scent. That morning, he spread several items across the garage floor, his worn field cap, his work gloves, an old flannel shirt that still held traces of sweat and dust. Shadow lifted his head, ears tilting forward, nostrils twitching. Hunger and instinct pulled him closer. Ethan didn't move, didn't push. He just waited, steady as stone. Slowly, Shadow stretched his neck forward, sniffing the cap. His muscles trembled, but he didn't retreat. Inch by inch, he examined each object, his body learning, recognizing, anchoring Ethan's scent as familiar. By noon, Ethan began simple signals. A raised palm for sit. A lowered hand for down. A closed fist for stay. Shadow flinched at sudden movements, so Ethan slowed, each gesture deliberate, soft. The progress was quiet, invisible to most eyes. But to Ethan, it was monumental. By late afternoon, Shadow no longer avoided his gaze. He met it, cautious but steady. That evening, Evelyn returned. She carried a paper sack of food, a loaf of bread, and a container of stew she'd insisted Ethan eat. Her hair gleamed silver under the porch light, and her expression was sharp as always, though softened by the sight of Shadow. She knelt, carefully setting the sack down. Her voice softened to a near whisper. "I thought he might take this." Shadow watched her, amber eyes alert but not hostile. She extended her hand, palm open, her movements slow, deliberate. For a long while, the shepherd only stared, his body taut. Then, inch by inch, he leaned forward. His nose brushed her fingers, breathing in the faint scent of soap and metal. His tail flicked once. Evelyn's lips curved into a rare smile, gentle, almost maternal. "There you are." Leaning against the workbench, Ethan let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It wasn't triumph, but it was trust. Fragile, growing, but real. That night, storm clouds gathered over the ridge, heavy and dark. The air grew thick, each breath heavy with humidity. Crickets sang from the grass, their chorus cut by the occasional croak of a frog. Ethan sat on the porch, the garage door left open so Shadow could choose his place. The shepherd lingered near the threshold, half inside, half out, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the floodlight. Then came the sound again. An engine. Not hurried. Not casual. Deliberate. Headlights flared down the road, too bright in the darkness. A truck barreled closer, tires spraying gravel, until it slid sideways near the edge of the property. Mud sprayed across the fence. The roar of the engine filled the night, its message clear. Shadow leapt to his feet, hackles raised. A growl ripped into deep, furious barks. He lunged toward the fence, teeth bared, his voice ringing like a war cry across the property. Ethan moved quickly, snapping on the floodlights. White brilliance flooded the yard, stripping shadows away. Through the glare, the truck idled just beyond the fence, tires dripping mud. A window rolled down slightly, and a silhouette leaned out. No words. Only a low, mocking laugh that carried on the humid air. Then the truck spun, tires cutting deep ruts in the mud, and roared off into the night. Shadow stayed braced at the fence, barking, body vibrating with fury and fear. Ethan stepped forward, resting a hand against the shepherd's back, steady, firm. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy, boy. Not tonight." Slowly, Shadow quieted, though his eyes stayed locked on the road long after the taillights vanished. Ethan studied the churned earth by the fence, deep gouges where the tires had spun. A scar carved into his land. His jaw set, voice low but certain. "This isn't over." The words weren't a guess. They were a promise. The storm broke the following night. It rolled in from the ridge at dusk, thunder grumbling like distant artillery. Clouds swelled heavy and black, stretching across the sky until the last scraps of sunlight vanished. By nightfall, rain poured down in sheets, hammering the tin roof of Ethan's garage, turning the yard into a swamp of mud and water. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray. Gutters overflowed, spilling torrents like silver ropes, and each flash of lightning lit the pines in stark, skeletal silhouettes. Ethan stood on the porch, hood of his old field jacket pulled up, watching the storm consume the road. Inside the garage, Shadow paced near the door, his sable coat plastered with damp from earlier when he dashed into the yard before the downpour worsened. His frame was still lean, but there was more weight on him now. Each day of food and rest was restoring him bit by bit. The difference showed most in his stance. Once, every sharp clang of metal sent him cowering. Now, though still cautious, he moved with purpose. His amber eyes glowed in the dim light, alert, steady. The storm rattled the earth, but he stood firm. It was the first time Ethan allowed himself to believe the shepherd might truly recover. The house carried the faint aroma of wood smoke and Evelyn's stew, which she had insisted he eat earlier that evening. She'd left just before the storm hit, her sedan swallowed by the curtain of rain. Now, the property belonged only to man, dog, and the storm's unrelenting song. Ethan crouched in the garage doorway, resting a steady hand on Shadow's damp flank. His voice was low, calm, steady even as thunder rolled. "Storm's just noise, boy. It's all bark, no bite. We stand through it, or we let it own us." Shadow's ears flicked, tail twitching faintly. After a pause, he leaned into Ethan's hand, pressing his head gently forward. A quiet affirmation. Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile. That's it. We hold the line together. Hours passed. The rain didn't let up. By midnight, the road was a dark river, headlights from passing vehicles smeared into ghostly beams through the downpour. Few dared travel in such weather. Which made the sound all the more jarring. A growl of an engine. Low, deliberate. Ethan stiffened instantly. His spine straightened, instincts sharp. He stepped onto the porch, rain drenching his jacket within seconds. Headlights flared through the curtain of water. A truck. Big, heavy, crawling closer. It slowed at the fence line. Idled. The engine's roar cut through the storm like a challenge. Ethan's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, boots sinking into the mud, rain soaking him to the bone. Shadow barreled out from the garage, barking thunderously, his voice raw but fierce. His hackles bristled, his body vibrating with primal defiance. The truck lurched forward suddenly, tires spinning mud into the air. It skidded sideways, fishtailing as if to ram the fence. The ground shook with the force. Shadow didn't back down. He lunged, teeth bared, barking so furiously it echoed like gunfire across the storm. Ethan moved quickly, snapping the floodlights on. White beams lit the yard, slicing through rain and dark. The truck loomed there, idling just beyond the fence. Tires churned water and mud, but it held still, staring down the property like a predator. The window rolled down just an inch. A shadow leaned out. No words. Only a long, mocking laugh that cut sharper than thunder. Then the truck spun its wheels, mud flying high, and tore away into the storm. Its taillights disappeared into the curtain of rain until only darkness and water remained. Ethan stood steady, rain dripping down his face, hand clenched into a fist at his side. Shadow remained pressed against the fence, barking long after the truck was gone, his amber eyes blazing not with fear but with loyalty, with fury. Finally, Ethan stepped forward, resting a hand firmly against the shepherd's shoulders, grounding him. His voice carried steel beneath its calm. Easy. They're gone. Not tonight. Shadow trembled, but the growl faded. He pressed against Ethan's leg, still alert, still watching the road. The churned earth by the fence told its own story, deep gouges carved by spinning tires, a scar on the land. Ethan studied it in silence, the rain pounding hard around them. His jaw set. This isn't over, he said quietly, voice nearly lost under the storm. And he knew it wasn't. Dawn came slow, the storm leaving behind a world washed raw. The air smelled of wet pine and soil. Puddles reflected the pale sky, and the road glistened black with lingering water. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. The night's images replayed in his mind, the headlights, the laughter, the churn of tires. But most of all, the envelope from days earlier. The photograph of Shadow taken through the fence. That wasn't a prank. It wasn't random cruelty. It was surveillance. And surveillance meant intent. By mid-morning, Evelyn's sedan appeared again, tires crunching against gravel. She stepped out carrying a battered leather satchel, heavier than her usual groceries. Her silver hair was bound tight, her back straight, though her eyes carried a weight of sleeplessness. She set the satchel on Ethan's table without preamble. We can't ignore this. Inside were photographs, prints of Shadow's wounds taken at the clinic. Dr. Ward's veterinary report. Evelyn's own handwritten account of what she had witnessed at the yard. And something else. A grease-stained notebook. I found this last month near the west gate of the scrapyard, Evelyn explained, adjusting her glasses. Didn't think much of it until now. But look, ledger notes. Dates, names, amounts. Monroe's handwriting, I'd bet on it. And here, She tapped a page where rough scrawls listed animals alongside dollar figures. Dogs. Bought. Sold. Disposed. Ethan's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. Each line was crude but damning. Paired with the photos, it painted a picture no one could ignore. "This is enough," he muttered, voice like gravel. "More than enough to bring the sheriff to your door." That afternoon, Evelyn made the call. Sheriff Daniels arrived before sundown. He stepped onto Ethan's porch with a deliberate heaviness, his boots leaving mud tracks on the boards. A man in his 50s, Daniels had sandy hair gone thin, a lined face carved by years of wearing the badge. He was known for caution, choosing to let disputes cool rather than fanning them. But when Ethan laid the notebook and photographs before him, his jaw set hard. "Damn fools," Daniels muttered, slipping the ledger into an evidence bag. "If this is Monroe's, he's cooked. I can't ignore it, not with this much in black and white." For once, hesitation left his voice. In its place was resolve. "We'll open a full investigation. Deputies will secure the yard before the night's out. Monroe's not walking free from this." The words carried weight, more than Ethan expected. Beside him, Shadow pressed close, amber eyes alert. His stance was no longer one of fear alone, but of readiness. And when two cruisers rolled down Main Street that evening, their red and blue lights flashing as deputies stretched tape across Monroe's gate, Redwood Springs felt the shift. Rumors rippled through every shop and cafe. Whispers turned into open talk. Travis Monroe, shielded for years by his brother's influence, was finally in custody. For once, the town saw that even the powerful could fall. The next morning dawned quiet, the storm having scrubbed the air clean. Redwood Springs glistened under a pale sun, puddles scattered across the cracked sidewalks, leaves pressed wet against the asphalt. The town, still buzzing with talk of Monroe's arrest, seemed almost lighter, though beneath the surface everyone knew the fight wasn't finished. Evelyn Carter was up before dawn. She dressed in her best wool coat, a deep navy, polished brass buttons catching the light, and pinned her silver hair neatly at the back of her head. She carried a folder of documents under one arm, her back straight, her steps deliberate. At the courthouse, she stood tall in front of the magistrate. Her voice was clear, her hands steady as she recounted everything she had seen that day at the scrapyard, the dog too thin to stand, the pipe raised in Frankie Bull's hand, the laughter of men who found cruelty amusing. She spoke with the kind of strength that came not from volume, but from truth. The gallery listened in heavy silence, neighbors, shopkeepers, old friends. Some shifted uneasily in their seats, ashamed to realize how long they had ignored what had festered in their town. Others stared fixedly ahead, unable to meet her eyes. Evelyn didn't waver. She carried the same resolve she had shown when she buried her husband years ago, the same steadiness she'd shown as a mother raising two sons in a town where justice didn't always reach the weak. Her words cut through excuses like glass through cloth. And when she stepped down, she left behind not just testimony, but conviction. Outside the courthouse, children laughed as they splashed through puddles left by the storm. Their voices carried down Main Street, a contrast to the weight of the hearing inside. A small group wandered toward Ethan's property later that afternoon. Curious, drawn by whispers of the dog rescued from the scrapyard, they gathered near the fence. Shadow lay in the grass, his coat brushed clean, still thin but steadier. When the children approached, he tensed. His ears flicked back, his muscles tightened, his amber eyes sharp with memory. Ethan crouched beside him, speaking low, voice calm as a river. "Easy, boy. They're not here to hurt you." The shepherd's breathing steadied, though every nerve in his body stayed alert. One child, a little girl with dark braids and a red raincoat, stretched out her hand through the fence. She froze, waiting, her small palm open. Shadow hesitated. Then, with the slow caution of a soul relearning trust, he leaned forward. His nose brushed her skin, warm breath tickling her fingers. The girl giggled. He's soft, she cried, turning to Evelyn, who had just arrived, basket in hand. For the first time in days, Evelyn smiled, not the tight, sharp smile of defiance, but something warm and true. She bent slightly, her voice carrying the gentleness of a grandmother. Yes, sweetheart. Soft where it matters most. The children laughed as they petted him, and for the first time, Shadow's tail gave a faint, unsteady wag. Ethan watched quietly, a weight lifting from his chest. Healing was happening, measured not in leaps, but in small, fragile moments like this. Days slipped by. The storm clouds cleared, leaving skies sharp and blue. Monroe remained locked behind bars, his scrapyard silenced under the watch of deputies. For Ethan, the quiet wasn't emptiness. It was a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. Evenings found him on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the ridge. The cicadas sang from the grass, and the scent of pine drifted through the cooling air. Shadow lay close, sometimes at his boots, sometimes stretched across the porch boards, his breaths deep and steady. Each day, he grew stronger. His ribs no longer carved sharp lines, his coat began to shine faintly in the sun. The fear in his eyes softened, replaced by steady trust. One evening, as the sky burned crimson with sunset, Shadow lifted his head and laid his jaw gently across Ethan's knee. Ethan's hand moved instinctively, fingers combing through thickening fur. His voice came low, almost reverent. "Welcome home, Shadow." The shepherd closed his eyes, tail twitching once against the boards. For the first time since being carried from the junkyard, he looked at peace. Not all miracles arrive with thunder and fire. Some arrive quietly, like a starving dog finding a soldier willing to stand between him and cruelty. Some unfold slowly, in the healing of broken trust, in the soft wag of a tail that once bristled with fear. Shadow found his home not only through courage and justice, but through something greater, proof that God does not abandon the forgotten. And in our own lives, we carry that same calling. To step in where others turn away. To lift those who cannot stand. To forgive when anger feels stronger. To love when the world insists on cruelty. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe no soul, not even the most wounded animal or the most broken person, is ever abandoned in God's eyes. And remember to subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that remind the world of faith, of love, and of second chances. May the Lord bless you and your family with peace, protection, and grace.